All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, hello, friends, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this crucial discussion on resisting repression in what many are calling a new Red Scare era. As we gather here, we are faced with a sobering reality. Escalated efforts by the US government have been targeting peace groups, journalists, activists, and anyone who dares dissent against the prevailing imperial narrative. We're in a difficult moment. Since October 7th of last year, for example, legislation has been introduced such as HR 6408, just to name one, which essentially goes after the financing of nonprofits who support the desire of the Palestinian people to live. Then you have the weaponization of FARA, which is the Foreign Agents Registration Act. We may hear more about that later. You have absurdities like the banning of TikTok and other information outlets not under the thumb of the unholy alliance between Silicon Valley and our pseudo-diplomatic and military establishments. And yes, while the wave of protest and enthusiasm against the empire right now has been substantial, there is still much work to be done. Julian Assange, although without a full pardon, is free, but Leonard Peltier remains behind the walls. We hear nonstop about the excitement surrounding the Democratic Party's ticket as they enable genocide, exploitation, and deprivation around the world, not to mention in our own home communities too, for that matter. Oh, and keep in mind that next week, actually tomorrow, is the beginning of the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Sorry, I meant the 2024 DNC, but you'd forgive me for mixing up the two events. All right, so today's panel discussion is a timely and vital exploration of these tactics of censorship, repression, and persecution that peace groups are facing around the country, and the chilling effect that results. In many ways, this is a natural extension to some of the stuff we heard at the previous panel, which was terrific. So today we are privileged to hear from a distinguished trio of activists who have been on the front lines of this struggle. We'll hear from Jody Evans from Code Pink, Jesse Neville from the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and Ali Wong from Columbia University. And they'll share their firsthand experiences with us. Each of these individuals has not only been witness to, but have also felt the sting of media smears, financial targeting, state violence, in some cases physical brutality, and malicious legal prosecutions, designed to silence dissent and marginalize those who challenge the status quo. So these authoritarian tactics, they echo the dark days of McCarthyism, and we'll hear about these experiences, and hopefully they'll say a few words about strategies and advice to resist this renewed Red Scare. Okay, so we will start off hearing from Jody Evans. Let's go ahead and get right to it. Jody Evans is the co-founder and current board member of Code Pink. She's a longtime activist and advocate for peace, as evident through the numerous documentary films that she has produced and the books that she has authored. More recently, Jody and her group Code Pink have been targeted by senior members of Congress, as well as media outlets like the New York Times, for their calling out of US policies of genocide and reckless brinksmanship. I'm honored now to turn it over to Code Pink's Jody Evans.
Thank you so much, Josh. So, peace and love. What a blessing to be invited to another Veterans for Peace conference. I love you, peacemakers, so much. I've been arrested and jailed with many of you, I can see, and marched alongside you. And I'm so grateful for all the ways you use your life and voices for peace. Thank you. And thank you just for what your hearts are. I just have deepest respect. Coming to this, I was remembering 2005 when we started Camp Casey at the end of this conference and turned the country from pro-Iraq war to against. But, let's just start with Cindy Sheehan, who paid a huge price. And, watching the daily McCarthyism on her was profound. So I just, want to bring that moment here. Sitting there watching her get attacked at the core of her heart every morning. She woke to a new attack, and let me say they were heart-ripping. She would cry for about a half an hour or so, pull herself together, and then head out to speak truth, regardless of the attacks. So For me, that is like the core of this. It's like we will be attacked. The work we are doing will, create attacked, but it's the getting up, holding each other's hand and moving forward that I think is, core to this work. You know, we have to remember as peace activists, if we're being affected, we will be attacked. Um, even, you know, they want to destroy us. We are getting in the way of their need. At Code Pink, we have a t-shirt that says, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss them off." Gandhi taught us that nonviolent direct action exposes the violence we live inside. That violence will manifest in many forms. Direct, like the brutal attacks and arrests on college campuses of peaceful pro-Palestinian activists, or slander, lies, lawfare, and long-term jail sentences. In the case of JFK, RFK, and MLK, it was death. Exposing the exposing or espousing truth can release horrific violence. So it doesn't mean we will be unharmed in our stance for peace. It is why others say you have courage when you stand up. They sense it has a price. They have witnessed the price. I understood this in high school in the 60s when I was reading about Emma Goldman, the anarchist who was jailed for 2 years because she was a peace activist. I was shocked that someone doing the right thing could be put in jail for it, could be silenced so the war could continue. A woman with just a voice was so threatening to people with all those weapons. I hold that inside me for the rest of my life. But of course, we don't think about the risks when we're working for peace and justice. We are just moved by the love in our heart for humanity and the horror at the violence and costs of war. That is a human response, but the war machine must cut it out at all cost. Really cut out humanity because it's destroying life, right? In war, all costs are accepted, and unfortunately, we're witnessing that every day. As we see what's happening in Gaza, the most insane, immoral, psychopathic behavior is unleashed on innocent people, and most people are remaining silent, especially in the United States, which is the core of this violence. Yet there are those that are being jailed and having their lives destroyed because they stand for peace and humanity. So we call it New McCarthyism because of that disgraced Cold Warrior Senator Joe McCarthy, who was allowed insane and brutal behavior towards communists and others during the Red Scare in the 50s, until someone sane came along and said it was not okay, and almost as fast as it came, it disappeared. I say hate doesn't have a very long shelf life. Often we hear about it in relation to those mostly writers in Hollywood whose lives were destroyed, but other targets were Communist Party leaders, civil rights activists who associated with communists, State Department officials who questioned the wisdom of US support for the losing side in the Chinese Civil War, union leaders, Puerto Rican independent activists, school teachers, and college professors. Some, especially the Communist Party leaders, were criminally prosecuted under the 1940 Smith Act. Others were left unemployed, unemployable, after being publicly accused of disloyalty. But rarely do we think about what happened to W.E. Du Bois, Claudia Jones, Paul Robeson, and the Rosenbergs, and the fear it sets up for others to limit their voice, their interests beyond the status quo, and their engagement. We've seen the engagement about justice for workers, for peace and equality shrink over decades. The activism has shrunk, and even the understanding of why we need to engage, organize, and never give up. That, however, is changing, and the curtains that have been thrown open for all to see the violence in its naked expression in Gaza is the moment we live in. We must love and work for peace and justice as much as they are fueled by their greed and power. I say they're on crack cocaine. We are driven by our hearts and truth. They will use anything and everything to get what they want, more power and more money. A year ago, the New York Times ran a hit piece on a group of us standing for peace who happened to get funding from the same person, my husband, funny that they would think a husband supporting his wife would be strange, especially since our connection is rooted when he was in the audience at the People's Tribunal on Palestine in 2010, as we were speaking about our BDS campaign against Ahava. His appreciation of our activism started then, but you won't read about that. The piece ran after 2 months of work of 11 reporters, and it fell flat. Even with liberals, it fell flat. Some friends said, "Oh, you're right. The New York Times does the work for the State Department. That wasn't journalism." I had started the China's Not Our Enemy campaign to combat the propaganda I saw pouring from corporate media outlets who obediently push a dangerous authoritarian propaganda narrative on behalf of the most fanatical hawks in the US national security state to make China our enemy and then go to war on them. Here, the propaganda created was to say you are either in support of Washington's hybrid war in China or you are secretly working for China. A good tool to silence all those who just plain like China, like Chinese Americans, since it's half of their DNA and is doing some amazing things like taking everyone out of poverty. They're not only silenced, but the violence against them has risen by multiples during this flood of propaganda. When I first received the questions from the New York Times, it was clear they were written by someone in the CIA. They were Hallmark questions, leading from a premise that was not true, full of accusations that were unfounded. My first response was to ignore them. The New York Times? Why do I care? I or anyone, that I care about doesn't read it. And the report had just come out that almost 6 million people had died in the war on terror. The New York Times had pushed. They had pushed lies that drove those wars, including the stupid color-coded alerts that Bush used to frighten the American people into war, which is why we call ourselves Code Pink for Peace. I showed the questions to a friend and said, "I haven't done anything wrong, so why answer?" And she said, "Jody, all your friends are in jail, haven't done anything wrong either." So just days before the article ran, I sent a statement, not responding to the questions, just statements of fact that dispelled what they were accusing in their line of questions. How absurd to think a foreign government would fund a live wire like me. One never knows where I'm going to show up and expose the truth. You can't do that if you're living a lie. I am an unrepentant good troublemaker. But Julian Assange published the truth about war, John Kiriakou exposed US using torture, and Daniel Hell exposed the violence of drones, and they were made to pay dearly. Well, the article ran on a Saturday. Those of us who were targeted went on the offensive on Sunday. We can't sue as that's way too expensive, but we could use the moment to educate, inspire, activate, and make clear this isn't about us, but a tool to shut all of us up. So we launched McCarthyism and is back. Together we can stop it. We said we stand together against the rise of new McCarthyism that is targeting peace activists, critics of US foreign policy, and Chinese Americans. Despite increased intimidation, we will remain steadfast in our mission to foster peace and international solidarity, countering the negative narrative of militarism, hostility, and fear. At Code Pink, we're used to it. We're Putin apologists. We work for the Iranian government. We side with dictators. I mean, in the beginning, we were Saddam apologists. But this time, we were showered with love and support by those who saw it as the McCarthyite, racist, sexist article of lies, distortion, innuendo, and hate. Many offering love, and some saying that you must be doing something right because they were taught to follow all those who were attacked by the New York Times. But that's not the experience of most who are attacked. The experience is lonely, guilt-ridden, embarrassing, and has costs. Real costs, personal, political, and psychological. A real cost paid out of the New York Times article is that Modi had 110 workers of NewsClick that was mentioned in the article as getting funding because Modi said they worked for China. A news outlet that doesn't talk about China, but does expose the violence to the farmers by Modi. Prabir, the journalist and publisher, was jailed for 6 months without charges. The New York Times article was also followed by members of Congress and congressional committees calling for investigations. And now we have lawfare lawsuits, but this is targeting work on Palestine. Every member of Congress has been briefed with the article, not the absurdity of it, but the proof that Code Pink is funded by China. They would love to discredit our truth telling in the halls of Congress, but it didn't work. The truth is still delivered daily and has great effect with intern staff and members. Many members know us and know our activism for peace to be potent and heart driven and disregard. Others use it as the bludgeon it was meant to be. Like Nancy Pelosi, who hates that we disrupt her constant war narrative with our calls for peace. We actually look forward to them having a suit against us on FARA so we can bring up the FARA rules regarding APAC and bring up the fact that we're funded by 13,000 donors. There is what is obvious in the new McCarthyism and what is happening in the crevices and corners and beyond eyesight. It is used to silence, as I said, but it is also used to call out those who are not loyal soldiers to the empire. We can see the expelling of Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, but not what that means about congressional staff. Even the voluntary culling by those who are stepping out of the Biden administration because of its position on Gaza, it has an effect on the entire fabric of those in power. It is now an alliance of far right and liberals. Both sides are cleaning up government from those who serve the people in peace. It is not only Trump the fascist trying to undermine government. People were purged who held responsibility to the needs of people and peace for decades, since Reagan and then Clinton. Project 2025 has been in practice for a very long time. McCarthyism did its part to cull those who were still left from Roosevelt, cleaning out those who still defend the rights of poor and working class and had an ideology or who were against the military-industrial complex. If you are effective in getting in the way of the plan for global hegemony, you are the enemy and the gloves are off. We think political as Democratic and Republican parties when it is and always has been the rich and the empire, the military-industrial complex against all those who get in their way. The people have demanded more in the past, have agitated for more, but too many people have been put to sleep with decades and decades of propaganda and a horrific education system that has been destroyed. We see it clearly in the encampments. Students who are clear and smart about what the truth is, have a moral compass and a commitment to all life, are being violently attacked by the universities and schools whose very mission are supposed to be what the students are fighting for? No, they've been dumbing down students to be cogs in the wheel for the empire for decades. And when you step outside what you are supposed to be doing, you are bludgeoned to shut up and everyone is witnessing. And then they tell the lies about it, what happened, and turn the truth upside down. So bringing us back to W.E. Du Bois, who said, "I am one who tells the truth and exposes evil and seeks with beauty for beauty to set the world right." We stand with Du Bois in this time of heightened hegemony, and that is a dangerous act. The cost of defiance tends to outweigh the cost of cooperation, including even during testimony when one cannot appeal. When faced with an objectionable line of questioning, we can't summon witnesses, we can't cross-examine the other side, or sue members of Congress for libel in hearings. Thankfully, the First Amendment prohibits the outright criminalization of political activism in this country, but censorship through more devious means is an old and enduring American tradition, one that can only be fought through collective courage, integrity, and defiance on a national scale. So stay off the propaganda machines. Stay in community as you are with Vets for Peace. You are strong and you create strength and power for peace. Teach. Many of you know this was core to our engagement in the 60s, and much need is arising for teaching now. Hearts and eyes are open. We need to be teachers and be allies. You are either on the side of the people or the empire. Don't let them divide us. It is another tool they use. Find your comrades, create with them, but don't judge others on what they're creating. It is going to take all of us in all forms. Let the forms exist. Let the flowers, rise. Worry about yourselves, gain your strength, your clarity, your commitment to truth and peace. Scratch and expose the empire and the rich who drive it, and cultivate your local peace economy. I learned very early in Code Pink, we can't end war till we end the war economy, the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy that is killing us, our communities, and the planet. We must all be cultivating a local peace economy so that we're not just being used in this war, but we are cultivating a future of, a peace economy, the giving, sharing, caring, thriving relational economy without which none of us would be alive. The fight is on. The rich have control of everything. The war economy is running the show, but we have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Jody. Thanks for the background on McCarthyism. That was very helpful, and for sharing your experiences with being the subject of such vicious propaganda smears. And thanks for your strength, your perseverance, and for mentioning the importance of the local peace economy. We really admire and love the consistent work and the effective actions of Code Pink. So at this time, we're going to hear from our next invited guest. Jesse Neville became active in the movement for reparations to African people back in 2010. And since 2014, he has served as the national chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, which seeks to build white solidarity with African liberation under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. In 2017, Jesse ran for mayor of St. Petersburg, Florida, under the slogan Unity Through Reparations. Since July of 2022, and along with co-defendants Penny Hess and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Jesse is one of the so-called Uhuru Three, the trio of movement leaders now facing a host of bogus federal charges, perhaps most notably the Foreign Agents Registration Act. After I spent some time with their organization and attended their national convention earlier this year in St. Louis, which was impactful to say the least, I'm so glad that we were able to bring Jesse on as a representative of the movement and of the Uhuru Three to talk about what I think is an experience that is so profoundly important for all of us to know about and become involved in, if for no other reason than how it pertains for the rest of us in due time. So I'll be dropping some information into the chat while Jesse speaks. That'll be happening. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to you, Uhuru Solidarity Chair, Jesse Neville. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh, for the introduction. And thank you to comrade Jody from Code Pink for the presentation that got us started today with this panel. And thank you to Veterans for Peace, for all of you, for having me at this important convention on this incredibly critical panel on the question of repression, political repression. And I extend a profound salute to all of you, to all of the members of Veterans for Peace. Thank you again to Josh, who I consider a comrade and a friend I've had the honor to work with. Thank you also to Ellen for your work in facilitating the technical aspects of this. And shout out to Bob Suberi and all of the members of Veterans for Peace in St. Louis, who we've had the honor to work closely with on several actions over the last few years. I want to start off by saying, free Palestine from the river to the sea, victory to the Palestinian people. Free Leonard Peltier, not one more year, victory to the indigenous people of this land. Free Mumia Abu Jamal and all African political prisoners and prisoners of war. And I finally want to recognize Aaron Bushnell in light of the fact that in St. Louis, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the organization I represent, and Veterans for Peace held a joint vigil in honor of his heroic stance and martyrdom. So I say, long live Aaron Bushnell, and as he said, no more genocide in our name. As Josh stated, I represent the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. I work under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party and its leader and founder, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Since 1972, when the African People's Socialist Party was founded, they have fought to unite African people around the world, including the Black community inside the United States, into a movement for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people everywhere, in a struggle against colonialism, against the colonial mode of production that dominates the planet Earth and has for the last 500 or 600 years. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement is the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee, formed by the African People's Socialist Party in 1976 to extend the struggle for African liberation into the white colonizer population. I work under the direct leadership of Penny Hess, the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, who has worked to build solidarity with the African Revolution for 47 years. We believe reparations are owed to African people, and our mission is to build a mass movement in the white community for reparations and solidarity with Black power. Along with Penny Hess and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is the primary target of the attack on the Uhuru movement, I am also one of the Uhuru Three. In just a couple of weeks, we will go to trial in the federal court in Tampa, Florida, facing bogus charges of being foreign agents and facing the possibility of up to 15 years in federal prison. I will talk to you now about this bogus case against the Uhuru Three and why it is so important to all of us who believe in free speech and political expression to join the fight back. On July 29th, 2022, the US government, in the form of its secret political police, the FBI, carried out pre-dawn, multi-state, coordinated, military-style SWAT raids on 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru movement in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Florida, including the home of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela, including the home of Penny Hess, including the home of Akile Anai, another leader of the African People's Socialist Party, and the home of myself. The FBI came with flashbang grenades, drones, armored vehicles, assault rifles, aimed the laser sights of their rifles at the chest of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is 82 years old, handcuffed him and others, and proceeded to raid the 7 homes and offices for at least 6 or 7 hours. Nobody was arrested that day, but we came to learn that a grand jury in Tampa, Florida, had indicted a Russian national who lives in Russia for allegedly, quote, recruiting people in the United States into a Russian conspiracy to sow discord in the US. I'm going to take a moment here to show you a 3-minute video about what happened on July 29th, and then I will come back on and complete my remarks about this. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over now to this video, and I will be right back.
This is the FBI. You have a federal warrant for this address. Keep your hands up and follow orders. This is the FBI. We have a warrant for...
They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out, something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here, that she refused to do.
As I was coming out, this big old drone met me.
The only revolutionary organization that's done something here on the ground practically for African people is the one that's come under attack. Institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers. That was the building that has come under attack.
You breach? What do you need?
They want.
I don't know.
I told them that money. Don't take it.
We will build a movement of white people that says hands off the Uhuru movement.
They see in the African People's Socialist Party a vanguard for the struggle for the liberation of our people. They see that because not just what we do here in the United States, but because we had the temerity to do like Garvey, to do like Malcolm X, and take the struggle of black people around the world.
Okay, so yes, so that video shows you a glimpse of what took place on July 29th. And as I mentioned, no one was actually arrested that day, despite the fact that many of us were handcuffed. But we were characterized, 4 of us were characterized, Chairman O'Malley, Yeshitela, Penny Hess, Akile, Anai, and myself were characterized as unindicted co-conspirators in this absurd indictment that they manufactured against a Russian national for a so-called conspiracy to sow discord in the United States. 9 months went by with no further direct action taken by the federal government. But during that time period, a number of other forms of attack, clearly orchestrated by the US government, took place, including the shutting down of bank accounts, the canceling of mortgages and lines of credit that had been operated by Uhuru movement organizations and institutions for decades, the dissolution of our fiscal sponsor, the revoking of a grant towards the Uhuru movement's Black community radio station, even the burning of a church across the street from where the chairman lives that had just come under contract for purchase by the Uhuru movement for use for Black community programs, and the list goes on. And finally, on April 18th of last year, 2023, a superseding indictment was unsealed, which now included criminal charges against Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, and myself, who are now referred to as the Uhuru Three. The charges against us are federal felonies that encompass a maximum prison sentence of 15 years for each of us. We are charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit an offense against or defraud the United States government, which is known as 18 USC section 371, and 1 count of a statute called 18 USC section 951, which is similar and related to, but not exactly the same as the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which actually it has a steeper prison sentence than the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which charges us with working as secret, illegal foreign agents of the Russian government without notifying the Attorney General's office. And this law is referred to by the Department of Justice as espionage light, that is typically used to go after people that they are accusing of being spies, secret agents of a foreign government. The charges against the Uhuru movement are preposterous and obviously untrue. But more than that, they're based on an offensive and racist notion that Black people, that Chairman Omali Yeshitela or any Black person in the United States would require education or influence by Russians or anyone for them to come to the conclusion that they are being oppressed and that they have a right to fight to end their oppression. As the chairman has said, it was not Russia that got him involved in the Black freedom struggle. It was America. There were no Russians present at the murder of Mike Brown or George Floyd or Sandra Bland or Breonna Taylor. That was U.S. colonial oppression that did that. This charge attempts to erase from history not only Chairman Omali Yeshitela's more than 60 years of struggle for the liberation of African people, but also hundreds of years of struggle by African people for their freedom. From the inception of this colonial system that was built on the backs of their enslavement and on the genocide of the indigenous people of this land. Our attorneys have said that these charges are so bogus that for us to take a plea would require us to commit perjury. Last July, one of our attorneys, Leonard Goodman, filed a motion for dismissal of the indictment based on the fact that the indictment itself is a violation of the First Amendment. We encourage people to read the indictment. Go to handsoffuhuru.org and read all of the legal documents. You will see everything they accuse the Uhuru movement of doing is in fact political speech protected by the First Amendment. They claim that we published articles, held events, held speaking tours, carried out a petition to charge the United States government with the crime of genocide against Black people in the United States, all of which are forms of pure political speech protected by the First Amendment. But they say you did it for the Russians. This is the first time the US government has used this law to target pure political speech. Every other time, and I'm not saying that it was legitimate the other times they used it, but they created some charge beyond speech, whether it was spying, whether it was bribery, corruption. But in this case, it's pure speech. Just a few days ago, over a year after that motion for dismissal was filed, the judge in the federal court district in Tampa, Florida, denied the motion for dismissal. We are set to go to trial on September 3rd. The chairman and the Uhuru Three are not guilty of these charges, but the United States and the FBI are guilty of countless murders of African freedom fighters, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, 30 members of the Black Panther Party, and even around the world, Patrice Lumumba and so many others. In fact, the FBI cut its teeth working to destroy the movement in the 1920s of Marcus Garvey, who united millions of Black people around the world in the struggle for their freedom. The attack on the Uhuru Three has widely been recognized as a test case for the limits of the US government's ability to criminalize political speech. This is why forces across the political spectrum have been moved to action by this attack. As the chairman has explained, the First Amendment was ratified in 1791 by one group of white settlers to free themselves from the tyranny of another group of colonizers while African people were still enslaved. Any democratic space that Black people have achieved in this country has been the consequence of life and death struggle. When McCarthyism arose in the 1950s and a measure of the terror and repression typically reserved for Black and other oppressed colonized peoples in this country began to make its appearance in the lives even of white people, it was the Black freedom struggle that pushed back the tide of this repression, that kept the society open. It was the courageous stand of Fannie Lou Hamer, of SNCC, of Paul Robeson, of African freedom fighters who stood then and who stand today as the torchbearers of democracy and democratic rights. That's why we say that it's more than a question of when they come for the Uhuru movement, they can come for you next. A more accurate statement is when they come for the Uhuru movement, it's you they're coming for. The party, the African People's Socialist Party, is standing in the way, in the front of the barricades, fighting to protect all of the people's democratic rights from this blatant attempt to dismantle free speech as we know it. And if the US government succeeds in railroading the chairman and the Uhuru Three into a guilty verdict, it sets the stage for them to indict anyone at any time for any speech they don't like, just by accusing you of doing it on behalf of a foreign government, simply on the basis of the fact that your views may align with that of a so-called foreign government. So to close my remarks, I want to say that the US government's intolerance for any speech that challenges their colonial stranglehold on the world's peoples shows not their strength, but their weakness and desperation. Under the bold and courageous leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and with the support of all of our friends and allies, including you in this meeting today, we know we will win. We know we are winning. A massive mobilization of the people fighting for free speech, fighting for the right to stand in international solidarity, fighting for the right of oppressed people to organize for their liberation can and will push them back. We invite everyone on this call to join us in St. Petersburg, Florida, on August 31st for a massive rally to demand that the US government drop the bogus charges against the Uhuru Three, and to join us on September 3rd in the federal court in Tampa, Florida, to pack the courts, to pack the streets, because the real jury is the masses of the people, and the real verdict will be won in the streets. And finally, we stand with Code Pink. We stand with all who find themselves in the crosshairs of US government repression. The Hands Off Uhuru Coalition issued a statement during the time period that Comrade Jody spoke of, condemning the attacks on Code Pink by the US government and its mouthpiece, the New York Times. We continue to stand with you against these attacks by the so-called Justice Department and the state-controlled media. We say, hands off Code Pink. We stand with all of the students and faculty at Columbia who have taken a courageous stand in support of the resistance of the Palestinian people. We say, hands off the student protesters. Victory to Palestine. To Veterans for Peace, the fight for the Uhuru Three is a fight to defend your right to stand against war, genocide, colonialism, and to join with the rest of humanity. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Uhuru. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying my blood boils at hearing this. That is certainly a lot to process. I hope we'll drop the link one more time in the chat about the mobilization for the upcoming action. Jesse and his co-defendants will be on trial again in 2 weeks, so I hope we can get some folks to show up there. I just want to say I have so much love and respect for the movement and the projects of what you all are doing out there in St. Louis. And in a lot of ways, you know, it's those community projects, the Black Power Blueprint, and so many other things that unfortunately gets overshadowed by all this other stuff, all this nonsense with the trial and whatnot. But we have to realize it's the effective community work that is being done that I think is quite obviously that is the actual threat. Anyway. Thanks, Jesse. That was powerful. All right, we will next turn to our third panelist, Ali Wong. Ali Wong is a PhD student in communications at Columbia University in New York City. And she's one of the recent student organizers during the Justice for Palestine protest movement. Her research areas explore how dis and misinformation, conspiracy theories, and radicalization inform both domestic extremism and foreign policy. Her education includes a BA and 2 master's degrees from New York University, as well as from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. As an organizer with Quad, that's Columbia University Apartheid Divest, she was recently a part of the campus movement that swept the nation, as her campus of Columbia University similarly led the nation over 50 years prior, calling for divestment during the American War on Vietnam. Now with us to share her story and her valuable perspective, please welcome Ali Wong.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Sorry, Josh. I'm a little overwhelmed. That was so powerful. Jesse, thank you for sharing. Jody, thank you for sharing. And I'm just really honored to be able to be on this panel and to get to share this story, and also really honored to get to speak to a group of people who have given their lives for our country, for our freedoms, for our ability to critique our government. And so, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so yes, so I'm going to talk about the new McCarthyism in the context of the front lines of protest at Columbia. And so Josh kind of went into a little bit of my background, and I wanted to just kind of highlight it to circle back around to the conversation of the new McCarthyism in terms of how people have responded to me speaking publicly about this. So just to recap, I'm currently a PhD student focused on religious extremism in the US and Russia, looking at the things that Josh mentions, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and radicalization. I'm also currently a consultant on the Middle East North African regional security at the UN, and have a background in studying from an academic and experiential perspective things such as human rights, peace, nonviolence, international affairs, and global conflict. I also have a master's degree in counterterrorism and nuclear policy. So I didn't really get involved with the student movement in an official capacity until after the first round of arrests, which took place on April 18th. Up until this point, there had been obviously protests on campus that had kind of cropped up on campus, around campus, but didn't get a ton of traction in terms of media coverage. On the morning of April 17th, there was a post that went out that compared 1968 with what was then erected that morning, an encampment on the front lawn of Columbia University. And this was organized by a group called the Columbia University Apartheid Divestment, or QUAD. And QUAD is a coalition of over 100 different student groups that are all rallied around this same shared vision for seeing Columbia divest from Israel and other corrupt governments to use our tuition dollars correctly in a way that is not going after the people and the community groups that we care about. So this encampment came up, and there were basically three main demands from QUAD. Divestment. So Columbia University is $13.8 billion endowment, of which only 0.5% is actually shared, how that money is spent, how it's invested. And so knowing that Columbia University is invested in a tremendous amount of companies that are involved in the war, things such as weaponry, equipment, and so forth. And so asking for divestment from Israel. Secondly, financial transparency. Like I said, there's so much money at Columbia, but there's little transparency as to how this is spent, where it's going, where our tuition dollars are. Finally, amnesty. Amnesty for the students who have been targeted, those who have been arrested. Even prior to April, there had been chemical weapons used against pro-Palestinian protesters. Certain leaders of QUAD had been targeted, surveilled, and so wanting for both legal amnesty as well as amnesty in Columbia itself for those who have been evicted from their dorms, those who are facing suspension and expulsion. So I got involved with the protests on campus when I watched on April 18th, the police come onto campus and arrest, I believe, 108 students. At this point, the encampment had only been erected for about 24 hours. And myself and a few friends watched it all unfold from the journalism school, which is where I attend, which had an aerial shot of the encampment. And it was actually, it was horrifying, but it was also really beautiful to see this encampment where people are, breaking bread with each other, singing songs, sharing stories about their families and their cultures. To see the police militarized against peaceful protesters was horrifying. But as they were being led away, we watched, you can see kind of on the lower right-hand screen, an open green. We saw basically everyone who was in the encampment just walk over and set up shop, in the next lawn over. And so just kind of sharing this message that despite the police, despite the university administration, we would not be deterred from speaking out against a genocide that our tuition dollars are contributing to. So at that point, I started to get involved with the student union that eventually kind of linked me up with some of the organizers of QUAD. And at this point, some friends of mine and I started doing fundraising and contributing to the cause in sort of an unofficial capacity. I joined the student union that was offering a barrier of protection to the encampment by marching around the encampment, by using our voices and our physical bodies to be a barrier and to add numbers to this population to say what the university is doing and their lack of cooperation, their lack of negotiation over months is not okay. So through the course of getting involved with QUAD and with the student union, I learned about kind of an organizational structure according to risk. So red, green, and yellow. So yellow being those who want to take the least amount of risk. They'll picket, they'll advocate, but they're not going to risk arrest or any of their standing with the university. Green, or sorry, that was green. Yellow, a little bit more, and then red finally being those who are, ride or die, arrest us, beat us, do whatever you need to, because that's what protest is about. It's about being demonstrative of what you're willing to give up for the sake of peace, for the sake of the community that you're advocating for. And so I joined that latter group of those who are willing to take a higher risk. And I did that for several reasons. One, just being an American citizen puts me at a level of privilege that my friends and colleagues, many of my friends and colleagues who are not American citizens, just don't have. You know, I was not risking deportation. I was not risking, you know, a visa issue, the color of my skin. I have lighter skin than many of my friends and colleagues, and fortunately and unfortunately, that comes with different stereotypes that I won't be targeted for. I'm a PhD student, meaning that the university is invested in me in a way that it's not invested in other students. So knowing that I would have privileged standing. And then finally, my name is Ali Wong. There's a famous comedian that also shares my name. And so knowing that I would be a difficult person for trolls to find online. I don't have social media, and I share my name with someone famous. And so fortunately, unfortunately, it's very difficult to find me online. So I knew that the risks that I were taking were still risks, but nothing compared to those of my friends and colleagues who were, you know, at much higher risk of danger and long-term danger. So I got involved. So I explained how I got involved. So the day that the arrest took place on April 30th, it was basically kind of like I got a text message from this group of higher risk folks, and they said, it's go time. We have intel that says, you know, a police raid is imminent, and we need people to guard this building that had been occupied the night before, because really thinking about property and space as being our only negotiating chip in our arsenal was really valuable. So I joined a group of students who were willing to kind of form a human barrier in front of this building that had been occupied. So I just want to show a very, very brief video. This is from a Columbia Journalism School student who was actually in a class that I was TAing. And she caught us as kind of forming this human chain in front of the building. So you can see me right there. So yeah, I mean, it's not a long video, but wanted to just give a sense of kind of the peace that existed in that moment. So when I got there, you know, at that point, the campus grounds had been pretty much cleared and people barred from being on campus. And so it was a really strange feeling because, you know, when you're on campus, there are just hundreds, if not thousands of people just buzzing everywhere. And so to be on campus in just this quiet serenity was a very odd feeling. And so when I got to the front of the building, we kind of formed this human chain, and all we did was we just sang. We sang really lovely songs about peace, about unity, about your people are my people, our struggles are aligned. And that was the site that the police walked into, was just us, a group of largely women, small women, arms linked, singing songs about peace. And at that point, once the police got onto campus, the people that are standing in front of us in that video are three groups of people. It's a group of journalists, so press who had been given passes to be on campus, as well as student journalists. You had legal observers, so objective people who are there for the purposes of documenting what happens in case there is legal action that is taken after the fact. And then finally, the medical community, which these are standard things when you have protests that likely are going to result in violence. Like the medical community, in case there is violence, to attend to whomever needs it. And so when the police came on campus, and I've seen estimates that are upwards of 1,000 police, they immediately kicked off those three groups of people. And at no point was I nervous, but when the police came and they kicked off that group of people, that's when I started to get nervous, because I knew that those three groups of people were there for our protection and were there for the documentation of what was likely about to occur, which would be violence. So as I mentioned, there were upwards of 1,000 armed military trained police officers of three different kinds of police. To confront, there were about 24 of us in front of the building and 46 inside. So just the disparity of that is outrageous. It's overwhelming. It's almost cinematic. And so basically what happened is the police kicked off that group of people and then just descended on us, just started tearing us apart, started physically throwing us to the ground. At one point I was struck in the head by likely a baton or shield or the butt of a gun, resulting in a welt on my head the size of a golf ball. I was injured in the ribs, and then I thought that I had broken my hand. And so okay, so this is a scene. This is from Time magazine, actually. This is a scene of us being attacked. You can see me there on the left, kind of dodging a punch from an NYPD officer. And then the results of that the following day, next couple of days. I thought my hand was broken. You can see we were instructed to write down a legal firm on our arm for when we were arrested, to be able to have that be our one phone call. We were denied a phone call. We were never read our rights. We were never given a conversation or told, stand down or you'll be arrested. That was obviously implied in why we were there. But in terms of procedure, none of the things that are typically done when you are confronted with arrest were done. And we were massively brutalized. And it's worth mentioning that, I had it easy. As it turns out, my hand was not broken, thankfully and unthankfully, because, it's harder to say, oh, the police hurt me rather than broke my hand. But folks I was arrested with had skull fractures, broken ankles, broken wrists, a dislocated pelvis. 4 people were taken into the hospital while they were in police custody. Students were evicted from their homes. And so I decided to write about it and to be very vocal about it. Again, because I felt so privileged to be in the position that I was, given everything that I just mentioned, I felt like it was my duty to speak publicly about this. And it was also one of the reasons why I chose arrest, because I knew that if I were arrested, it would give me the authority to speak to the media and help write the narrative. Up until this point, I had been seeing so many things in the news about that were just not representative of my experience as a Columbia student, talking about violent anti-Semitism when I had been to the encampment and it was just like a music festival. It was just, people from all faiths and none, from all walks of life, just breaking bread together and sharing their stories and communities. And so seeing something so grossly different represented on the media was horrifying to me. So as a result, I made a lot of media appearances. I wrote an article in USA Today, which I think will be dropped in the chat, which was kind of more of a walkthrough of my experience. Appeared in NBC, NPR, New York Times, Time Magazine, a documentary, so on and so forth, because I felt like it was so important for me to share my experience when there are all these counter narratives coming up, talking about outside agitators, talking about how we'd been radicalized, talking about how we were agents of Hamas or supporting terrorism. And so as a result, that put an obvious target on my back. And it resulted in more or less this, which was not a surprise. But basically I was smeared all over online, all over Twitter, all over in the comment sections. I received death threats in my LinkedIn. People found my email by searching Columbia and wrote nasty things. And fortunately and unfortunately, I've done a lot of research on extremism online and terrorism. So I spent a lot of time in the dark corners of the internet and have read a lot of gross things. So this was not surprising, because this is what the the internet is. And 2, it's not like these are things that really particularly hurt me, but more just because the reason I mentioned kind of my academic background ahead of this is just because a lot of the rhetoric around this is, you are a snowflake. You don't know what you're talking about. You are just privileged and, you're woke and all these different things, libtard, whatever. And just really trying to discredit the things that myself and other people who are Columbia students, and so, know how to think for ourselves, to try to invalidate the things that we've experienced, the things that make us qualified to speak on this issue in a nuanced way. Yeah. So I bring this part up just because I really love the theme is the new McCarthyism. In my master's, I did my master's thesis actually looking at the information operations between the US and Russia during the Cold War. And so I'm a student of Cold War history. And I would say arguably the most insidious thing that came out of McCarthyism, which ran from 1947 to 1959, was that although it was a government initiative that was strictly focused on government employees to root out communism, it permeated American society in a way that made people suspicious of their neighbors, of their friends, of their teachers, of officials. It created a culture of paranoia, initially aimed at an external adversary, but eventually one that turned insular and fostered a paranoid society that discouraged community and encouraged isolation on the basis of quote unquote safety. And so that's what we're seeing here is this sense of paranoia, this sense of looking over your shoulder and finger pointing, trying to expose people for some kind of villain that you might think they are, and really to turn people against each other. And that's what I and other students in Columbia have witnessed. A dear friend of mine said, it's not the protesters on campus that are making me feel unsafe. It's actually the university administration. It's all of the police that are being put on campus and turning this campus into a police state that makes me feel unsafe. And that's McCarthyism. It's wanting to try to root these things out, having this invisible enemy, and making people turn against each other. And that's what we've seen on campus. And one of the beautiful things that came out, particularly of the USA Today article that I wrote, is that it was so widely shared that I was approached by several Jewish students who knew me personally afterward and said, "Thank you for writing that, because this has actually shaped my understanding of the protests." And so, so advice being, lean in. Like, it's hard to hate people up close. And that's what the internet does, is it distances people, and it's hard to hate people up close. And so when you have a face, when you have a name, when you have a teacher or a TA or a student or a colleague who subscribes to something that's different from you, have those conversations, because that's where hate gets destroyed. That's where disunity becomes unity. So anyway, jumping back into our narrative, after I wrote this article, or after I was arrested, there were several narratives that came out. The morning after, Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York City, said the NYPD's precision policing ensured that the operation was organized, calm, and that there were no injuries or violent clashes. Manu Shafiq, who was our president up until several days ago, wrote an email to the university-wide email that I got several hours after returning home from being arrested and held in jail. And she said, "I thank the NYPD for their incredible professionalism and support." There were politicians in the days leading up to this and the days after who condemned what was happening on campus. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, came and had the audacity to stand on the top of our library steps and speak to something he knew nothing about, condemning the protest movement, condemning those who had erected the encampment, and saying that we were vilifying Jewish students on campus. Crucially, Jewish students have been so crucial to this moment, to this movement. During the encampment, there was a Shabbat, Passover happened, and people, shared a meal together. So anti-Semitism is not something that I personally have observed during the past few months. And then finally, media reporting, as I mentioned, just seeing the narrative that had come out before, during, and after all of these things happened was just so infuriating, because it just didn't represent my experience. So you have this system of people who you're paying through your tax dollars, paying through your tuition dollars to keep you safe, being the ones that are actually systemically gaslighting you. And that has been probably the central term that I have used to describe my experience with this, is that it's wild to have experienced something so physically, emotionally, and intellectually traumatic, And then to have everyone from the president of the United States to the president of your university to media outlets saying something that is completely contradictory to your own personal experience. And that for me has been the most traumatic aspect of it, is the fact that, you know, this story that I was beaten and arrested to be able to tell is one that is not being believed because of systemic gaslighting. So speaking, going back to the theme of New McCarthyism, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few months is the cost of protest. As Josh mentioned, we're kind of building on the foundations of a long history of protest movements, student protest movements at Columbia, starting from 1968, the student movement that protested the Vietnam War, up through apartheid South Africa, and even now today, 2024, protesting the way that university uses our tuition dollars. And it's not to discredit any of the protests that have happened before, but I would argue that the cost of protest in 2024 is wildly more costly than it was in any other point in human history because of the internet, because you have things like doxing. Several days after being arrested, the NYPD released the names, addresses, ages, and genders, misgendering many people, of I want to say maybe 50 or 60 folks who were arrested. And this information then got proliferated all over the right-wing media and really gross websites online. And then which then catalyzed things like physical danger, stalking, harassing, vandalism, surveilling. There was one person I was arrested with who had their home with multiple children in it graffitied with pro-Nazi signs. Misquoting and skewing involvement. So my experience with the media, I got kind of a crash course in the media and how the media kind of slices up your experience, slices up your story and uses it to their agenda and not letting a story be a story itself. Future employment. So the fact that the internet is forever, and for people who have been public, it does have a long-lasting impression on employers when they Google you. Legal consequences. There are folks who are inside the occupied building who are facing federal terrorism charges. Expulsion and suspension. Although things have quieted down over the summer, there have still been a lot of protesting as internal trials for student expulsion and suspension are happening. And so yeah, all of these things mirror kind of the paranoia of the McCarthy era of, again, trying to turn people against each other, turn friends and neighbors into enemies. And that's what we're seeing now. So what comes next? I don't know. I know, but I don't know. This is something that we're building on a legacy of people who have been pushing for Israeli divestment for decades. This is probably the most significant stride that we've made so far. You know, we being myself and people who have come before me, probably the most significant stride that we've made so far. And we are not stopping until we achieve divestments. As I mentioned, Manu Shafiq, our former president, announced her resignation just several days ago. And so have been getting a lot of inquiries about people saying, oh, you know, that's huge. So what comes next? It is huge, but it actually doesn't affect our messaging whatsoever. We're asking for divestment, transparency, and amnesty. Okay, so she resigned. Tell me what you're going to do about divestment. Tell me how you're going to spend our tuition dollars, because that's what we care about. We don't really care about getting rid of university bureaucrats. I mean, we do, but what we're really asking for is the end to a genocide, the end to complicity in bombing our friends and neighbors. There are many people whose arms I linked up with, who I've been in contact with, whose tuition dollars have literally gone to bomb their own families, who have lost cousins and fathers and brothers and sisters and aunties. Like, their money, their tuition dollars are going to that. And so that is what we're asking. And so we are planning on continuing the protest movement. I'm not entirely sure what that will look like, and Quad is in the process of kind of recalibrating and refiguring out what it looks like to breathe life into this movement again come fall, because I think that in many respects the university has hoped that we would just kind of go away after the summer and after the last police raid, but that is not happening anytime soon. We are determined, we are steadfast, and this isn't a momentary fleeting passion. This is something that many of us feel in our bones, feel in our blood, and are willing to do whatever it takes. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ali. So sorry that you and your fellow students have gone through this for the crime of demanding divestment from apartheid and genocide. I think that label of systemic gaslighting is such an apt term for what you experienced and for what the world has been witnessing. I just want to thank you for the leadership displayed by yourself and your fellow organizers. And I just want you to know that you have a force of allies here in VFP.
Thank you so much.
All right, friends, let's go ahead and turn to some questions. So audience members, please take a moment, and it's a good idea to go ahead and write your questions, and we'll drop them in the chat. So while you are thinking about your questions and gathering those, before we get to the audience members, I wonder if we can't first in turn ask each of you, the panelists, if you have one question toward each other. And thank you, Jody, for the suggestion. So we'll go back and we'll start in the original order. If you don't mind starting us off, Jody. A question for either of your fellow panelists.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, both of you, for your words, for your voices, for your courage, for your heart. And these stories are so important right now, and you being on the very front lines of this violence and sharing what that's like is so important. So Ali, I want to ask you a question, because this has kind of been life-changing for you. One of the things that sometimes is experienced is a sense of liberation. And I wondered if you feel a sense of internal liberation in the attacks, like from the attacks. Is there something in you that you felt got liberated in this process?
A really good question. Thank you for asking. You know, it's funny because even leading up to the arrests, when me and some other friends started getting involved in the encampment and getting involved with the student union and doing the thing, whatever was needed of us, whether it was supplying food or supplies or marching around the encampment, one of the things that I said to one of my dear friends was, I feel more alive right now than I have in a really long time. Because I started protesting, during the Iraq War when I was 17, and I've been involved in many different protest movements, throughout the past 20 plus years. But I've gotten to a point where I have been more focused on things like policy, things at a higher level, just because of my education and work experience. But there was something about being on the ground, like smelling the energy, feeling the energy, literally locking arms with people that was just humanizing in a weird way. It kind of returned me to kind of where I had started from. So liberating, I don't know if that would be the word I would use, but definitely, it made me feel more alive and like I had that solidarity, that physical solidarity with people. And there's something really beautiful about that. It is, I hate to use the term in a room of veterans, but it did feel like kind of going to war with people in some respects. And so there's something really beautiful about that, to be like, it doesn't matter who this person is or that person is or what they believe or how they identify. Like, we are all here around a shared cause and something we believe in so deeply in our bones, that we're willing to do whatever it takes to see our brothers and sisters in Palestine free.
Thank you for answering that. Thank you.
All right, Jesse, would you like to ask a question of either of your co-panelists?
No, thank you. Thank you, both of you. That was really powerful to hear from each of you. And I guess the only question I would ask is what kinds of actions people can take now to support you based on where you're at in the respective struggles that you talked about. And that question is for both of you.
Jody, I'll let you go. I've been doing a lot of talking.
Well, I think I said that at the end, for me, it's about being, recognizing what we're talking about right here. And part of that is how much we live inside of propaganda. And I find it always humorous that we'll say things like this, and then people will use whatever's out there and feel aligned with it. And so it's that space of where you can unalign yourself from what is literally the water we swim in. And it's hard. And it's why, in the work of local peace economy, of really recognizing that we live in a war economy culture, and and it causes addictions that we're all imbued with, because it's to survive, we live here. It's kind of like Ali was talking about. It's like, for the survival, but is that really what we want to survive inside of? Do you know what I mean? It's like that constant recognition of this is a structure. It is the war economy, and that we need to take ourselves off of it. We need to be telling the truth. We need to be caring for each other. We need to, allow ourselves to grieve, to care, to celebrate, to have joy. It's just like, I watched Biden like get swept out of the election in like a day, and something else happened. And I was like, wait a sec, you guys, we forgot to celebrate. We did that. He had dementia before he was elected president. That was the pro-Palestinian movement undermining his capacity to be president again. But we just went off. So it's just all the places where we can, like Ellie said, be human together, to celebrate. You told a lot of dark things, Ellie, and I wanted to bring us back to the light about what it is to be in the streets together, why we do it, even if it is dangerous, that we're servants of life, of peace, of life, of humanity and justice. So all the ways that we can continue to pull ourselves off the war economy, create local peace economies where we are, and be an allies with each other, standing together. So that would be me.
Thank you.
Really good. I mean, I would pretty much say the same thing. I think, where conversations around Israel and Palestine are concerned, I think, even as someone who has a degree of education and kind of practical professional experience, I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Israeli. And I think where this is concerned, one of the things I say to people all the time is, I think it's really important to tread lightly on other people's stories. And so, yes, I, as a non-Israeli, non-Palestinian, I can have my view, I can have my opinion, but it's just as important for me to shut up and listen to the stories and the experience of the people who are there and experiencing it. So to your question, Jesse, of, how can people be supporting? I would say the same thing. A lot of the nastiness I've seen online is from people who really were not there and know nothing about it. They're just reading like secondary or tertiary sources about this, and it's just kind of feeding, your own opinion, regardless of side, right? So I would say tread lightly on other people's stories, whether those people are Palestinians, Israelis, Columbia students, UCLA students, any number of people who are represented here, to do that and to encourage that in conversations around these things, to be like, it's more important to get your facts straight than for you to be right. And listen, and then, on a more practical level, follow what we're doing at Columbia, share it, support it, like it. But yeah. Okay, so I'll throw out a question. I'm always struck when people are advocates for communities that are not their own. So I would just ask the both of you, how did your heart break for these things? How did you come to be in the place where you are putting so much on the line for communities that you don't necessarily represent?
Go ahead, Jody. You can kick it off.
Why don't you start?
Okay. I appreciate that question. And yeah, I think, the organization that I'm a part of, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, was actually created specifically to address that question. It's not an organization that white people created. It was an organization created by the African People's Socialist Party. In 1976, they created the African People's Solidarity Committee, our parent organization, to deal with the question of the relationship of white people to the struggles of African people, indigenous people, colonized peoples around the world, based on the understanding that's referred to as African internationalism, that, you know, white people cannot really ever fully understand you know, what the experiences and reality of what the rest of the world is living under, because of this colonial world system, this colonial mode of production that came into being through the assault on Africa and the invasion of Africa and the enslavement of millions of African human beings who were forced to work for hundreds of years for nothing, and based on the slaughter and genocide and theft of land from the indigenous people. It created a pedestal upon which all white people rest. And that doesn't mean that all of us in the white community benefit equally from this social system. Not all of us are rich or are Trump or Biden or whatever, but it does mean that there's a material basis to opportunism that historically has informed the way we have related to the Black liberation movement and to other struggles of colonized peoples, where we've attempted to lead it from behind or from in front or control the resources. And what the African People's Socialist Party said is, no, if you're a white person who wants to take responsibility for this history, it's not about guilt, it's not about denial, it's not about any of that. It's about taking responsibility for it, looking at it face to face and saying, this is our history, this is our inheritance, and we can do something about it. We can join the rest of humanity. We don't have to be in a self-imposed state of exile and isolation from the rest of the peoples on the planet Earth. We can join the human family, but it has to be on their terms. We can't just saunter in and say, okay, here we are. We have to come with humility, and we have to be able to work under their leadership, work under the leadership of African colonized peoples who are leading the struggle for all human beings on the planet Earth to live with no one profiting at the expense of anybody else. That's the future I want to be a part of. I don't want to live at the expense of anybody else. So that's why, you know, I've been won through my experiences in this movement to understand that the liberation of African people, of indigenous people, of colonized peoples is also my liberation from being an oppressor, from being a colonizer, which is something I don't want. You know, it's something that is ultimately not in my interests. I have no interest in going down with the sinking ship of US imperialism that the masses of the people of the planet Earth are on fire to bring down so they can be free, so their children can be free. So that's what won me to be a part of this movement, and, you know, to see that the interests of African and oppressed peoples and our interests are one. And that's what, you know, genuine solidarity means. And that's what's coming under attack with this bogus prosecution of the Uhuru Three. They're attacking not only Chairman Omali Yeshitela, but Penny Hess and myself, who represent the ability for white people to hear this message and the strategy to say, no, white people can stand on the right side of history. And they don't want that. You know, I'll just finish by saying, Lisa Davis from the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations has pointed out the white woman that accused Emmett Till of whistling at her, quote unquote, the Biden administration's Department of Justice closed an investigation to her and allowed her to face no penalty whatsoever. She died in her 90s or something in her bed. Okay. No white person ever faced any criminal charges for any of the lynchings and terror that we carried out against African people for over 100 years in this country. And yet now, the first time white people can be one to say reparations, to say solidarity with Black power, we get indicted. So that tells you everything you need to know about where the US government wants you to stand if you're a white person. And we have to say, hell no, we stand with the peoples of this world, and nothing is going to change that.
Let me stop weapons science.
Okay.
I'm going to leave
All
it
right,
to
thank
dry.
you. And I just want to remind people to go ahead and mute themselves if you're in the audience, please. Thank you. Thank you so much for that round of questions. I want to take it over to the to the audience chat. I do want to mention that we have some statements of strong support from our own Doug Rawlings, who, by the way, is a founding member of Veterans for Peace, if our panelists don't already know, and an all-around wonderful human, as many of us know too well. So thank you, Doug, for being here and for your support of this discussion. And then we have Colette Ansell from the north of Ireland, who is writing and kind of echoing Doug's statements, and it looks like a more of a comment or maybe a rhetorical question for Ali, just saying, do you realize how much Columbia students have inspired other students around the world? And she's mentioning, of course, the other encampments that appeared in the UK and Ireland soon after those in New York. So great job on that, Ali. Let's see. And so if anybody has other questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. And I will just ask the question really quick. I'll put this one to Jesse. Well, number one, are there ways if people are not able to attend in person that people remotely can help the Uhuru 3? And then secondly, is there anything after the fact, I mean, after that you've gone through with all of this, is there anything that, going back to the whole idea of strategies of what to do, anything that you would have done differently to I don't know, to build resilience against this kind of repression, had you known that raid was coming and had you known all of this was about to happen? Because I think it's safe to assume that these kinds of things are coming for others as well. So what steps might you have taken had you been aware?
Well, I don't think so. I think that, I mean, because, you know, our the fight back, the anti-colonial free speech fight back of Hands Off Uhuru, it's been brilliantly led by the African People's Socialist Party, by Chairman O'Malley and Mwezi Odom, who's an incredible leader who is actually the chair of the Hands Off Uhuru campaign. They've done you know, it's been an incredibly powerful campaign. Veterans for Peace has been a really important part of it, and many other organizations, hundreds of organizations. And I think that it's moved in a really powerful and brilliant way. And I think in terms of ways that people can participate remotely, I think if you go to, and I saw Lauren putting in the chat, if you go to handsoffahuru.org/volunteer, fill out that form. Somebody will be in touch with you about things you can do, because there will be call-in campaigns and other kinds of social media actions people can take. So I do encourage people to do that. But I think if anything, if we could do anything differently, it would just be doing it even more, going even harder, going, you know, even stronger, and getting the word out even more. That's what I would say. And, you know, looking back on it, in terms of everything prior to the raids, yeah, that's how I feel about it. Incredibly proud of everything I've had the honor to be a part of in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. I regret nothing except not doing even more. So that's what I would say. And other little comment I want to chime in is the thesis that you mentioned, Ali, sounds very interesting. I don't know if that's available to read anywhere, but I would definitely be interested in checking that out if so.
Thanks. I can send it to you.
Great, thanks.
I have to run protest.
Jody's going to leave us a little bit early. Thank you so much for being with us, Jody Evans of Code Pink, and for your wonderful
Thanks for all
words
you
today.
do. Much love.
And then this will probably be our last question I will end with, and it comes in from our own Jan Ruman from San Diego Chapter 91. Good to see you, Jan. And Jan asks, well, first he says, Ali, you're an amazing activist. The question is, well, number one, are you finished with your education? And then secondly, what do you envision we should do to work together in concert as the school year begins this fall on campuses across the nation?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm not finished with my education. I have finished the coursework that's required for my PhD, and I'm now starting to move into the research part of my dissertation. So it'll probably be another few years. What was it? What do you envision we should do to work together? It's a good question. I mean, Quad and other groups like it on other campuses, we talk internally. And so I would say, you know, follow Quad on, I don't have social media, but like on Instagram, on Twitter, on whatever outlet you can find. And do the same for the different student groups going on, you know, all over the world. I would imagine, particularly the big ones like UCLA and University of Texas Austin, who have also been incredibly instrumental in this movement, will probably also be starting things up in the fall again. As I mentioned, I think that the hope is that, you know, that summer would have shut things down and people would have gotten bored, but that's not the case. And I do know that there are coordinated efforts to start things up again. One other thing that I just looked at my phone as we were chatting, and I noticed that there was a New York Times update that Donald Trump has vowed to use the military for domestic law enforcement to patrol the border, suppress violent protests and crime. And so I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but as you vote this November, think through not just like the top of the ticket, but look all the way down. See where your local representatives, your state representatives, anyone who's on the ballot, look at where they stand on these different movements, on where they stand on law enforcement, where they stand on the Israel-Gaza conflict. So look at where they stand on all these different things and vote according to those, because those are going to be the most significant things in the long term, and the things that are largely going to inform how the student protests move forward.
Thank you so much for that, Ali. And then we'll end with one final question before we close. And this can go to either one of you. This comes in from Phil Joslin in Northern California. Good to see you, Phil. And he mentions the the anti-communism of the McCarthy era is still being echoed through our discourse today in the form of anti-Russian and anti-Chinese sentiment that's expressed all throughout, even within our movement sometimes, often sort of being taboo, forbidden from discussion. And so Phil asks, how do we raise differences within our movement without shutting out questions that go to the heart of what we are fighting against, perhaps in the liberal sentiment of civility? I don't know if either of you want to try to take that one.
Okay. Well, yeah, I appreciate this discussion a lot. It's really been an honor to be a part of this. And I'm not sure. I think raising differences is important. I think unity has to be principled unity. And I think like the Hands Off Uhuru Coalition has principles of unity that include support for the right of African and colonized people to advocate and organize for their liberation. So I think that's important to be clear about that, not to cover that over. With regards to the other part of the question about the anti-communism of the McCarthy era, I appreciate that point being raised. There's not time to go into that in as much depth as we could right now, but I just wanted to point out that I think one thing that's really important to continuously be reminded of, and which the Uhuru movement talks about a lot, is the fact that what is commonly referred to by a lot of us, especially white people, or what might be characterized as white leftists, as fascism, are conditions which are pretty normal for African, indigenous, and colonized peoples in their everyday lives under just ordinary, everyday colonial oppression. And for an African person or an indigenous person, there isn't a whole world of difference between liberal or democratic colonialism, like Chairman Amali says, or fascist colonialism. Colonialism is colonialism, and I think that a lot of the times when the conditions that are normalized for African and indigenous people begin to intrude into the lives of white people because of the crisis caused by the fact that this is a parasitic system based upon oppression. So when oppressed peoples fight for their freedom, it destabilizes the social system, and it causes even those of us on the pedestal to experience some of that repression. That we have to remember that African and colonized and indigenous people, oppressed peoples, have been fighting this thing from day one. So rather than doing as we've often done in the past and trying to make it better for ourselves within the context of the colonial status quo, it makes much more sense to unite with African and colonized people who are fighting to do away with the colonial system of oppression altogether. And that's what I would say about that. I know it was sort of going a little bit away from the question, but thank you for raising that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So as we draw this this powerful discussion to a close, I hope we carry forward the key message and messages and insights shared by our panelists. So as we leave here, let us remember that every voice matters, every act of courage counts, and by supporting one another, remaining steadfast in our commitment to the cause, we can hopefully turn the tide against this wave of repression and build a culture where democracy can flourish, a culture of peace. I want to thank Jody Evans, Jesse Neville, and Ali Wong for being with us, and thank you all for being here and coming together for this essential conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, be sure to come back on in the next about 25 minutes on the next panel, looking at the rising multipolar world and the looming threat of world war. It'll be hosted by Michael Wong. He'll be talking with KJ No, Ken Hammond, and Matt Ho, so you don't want to miss that. We'll see you all there. Take care.